Hello class, welcome to our online video. Today, let's read A Long Walk to Water, Chapter 9. First, let's look at the bell ringer. Number 1. What did the strangers talk about? The correct answer is B, water. Number 2. What did Salva see in the desert? The correct answer is A group of people. So please write these in your notebook. Okay, so now let's read chapter 9 together. This time I did something new. So the pink words are vocabulary words. The blue sentences are important words. And the yellow words are words with teacher comments. I hope the colors help while we read. Let's go. A Long Walk to Water, Chapter 9, Southern Sudan, 2008. Naya's family had been back in the village for several months the day the visitors came. In fact, it was nearly time to leave for the camp again. So, in the beginning of chapter 9, know that a lot of time has passed between chapter 8 and 9 in Naya's story. Now, Naya's family is living at their regular house, where Naya walks 30 kilometers each day to get water from the pond. Naya's family returned from the lake camp many months ago, so a lot of time has passed now. As the jeep drove up, most of the children ran to meet it. Shy about meeting strangers, Naya hung back. Two men emerged from the jeep. They spoke to the biggest boys, including Naya's brother, Dep, who led them to the home of the village's chief, his and Naya's uncle. The chief came out of the house to greet the visitors. They sat in the shade of the house with some of the other village men and drank tea together and talked for a while. So again, the yellow words are notes, the pink words are vocabulary you can find here, and the blue words are important words. So please, let's read carefully. What are they talking about? Naya asked Dep. Something about water, Dep replied. Water? The nearest water was the pond, of course, half a morning's walk away. Anyone could have told them that. So anyone could have told them that. This is a common expression used when information is very common knowledge. So here, Naya is thinking, everyone knows the closest water is at the pond. Why are these men talking about water? Okay, now we're changing to Salva's story, Southern Sudan, 1985. Salva had never seen anything like the desert. Around his village, Lun Arik, enough grass and shrubs grew to feed the grazing cattle. There were even trees. But here in the desert, nothing green could survive except tiny, evergreen acacia bushes, which somehow endured the long winter months with almost no water. Uncle said It would take 3 days to cross the Akobo. Salva's shoes stood no chance against the hot, stony desert ground. The soles, made from rubber tire treads, had already been reduced to shreds held together with a little leather and a great deal of hope. After only a few minutes, Salva had to kick off the flapping treads and continue barefoot. So, now Salva's group is walking in the desert. The desert is shocking to Salva. At home, there was enough rain that grass, trees, and other green plants existed. But in the desert, the only plants Salva sees are these acacia bushes. No grass, there's no trees, because the desert climate is very dry. The first day in the desert felt like the longest day Salva had ever lived through. The sun was relentless and eternal. There was neither wisp of cloud nor whiff of breeze for relief. Each minute of walking in that arid heat felt like an hour. Even breathing became an effort. Every breath Salva took seemed to drain strength rather than restore it. Thorns gored his feet. His lips became cracked and parched. Uncle cautioned him to make the water in his gourd last as long as possible. It was the hardest thing Salva had ever done, taking only tiny sips when his body cried out for huge gulps of thirst-quenching, life-giving water. The worst moment of the day happened near the end. Salva stubbed his bare toe on a rock, and his whole toenail came off. The pain was terrible. Salva tried to bite his lip, but the awfulness of that never-ending day was too much for him. He lowered his head, and the tears began to flow. Soon he was crying so hard that he could hardly get his breath. He could not think. He could barely see. He had to slow down, and for the first time on the long journey, he began to lag behind the group. Stumbling about blindly, he did not notice the group drawing farther and farther ahead of him. So drawing farther and farther ahead of him means not drawing like with art, but Salva walked slower than the group. So the distance between Salva and the group increased. That's what this means. As if by magic, Uncle was suddenly at his side. Salva Mawane Dut Arik, he said, using Salva's full name, loud and clear. Salva lifted his head, the sobs interrupted by surprise. Do you see that group of bushes? Uncle said, pointing. You need only to walk as far as those bushes. Can you do that, Salva Maween Dut Arik? Salva wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He could see the bushes. They did not look too far away. Uncle reached into his bag. He took out a tamarind and handed it to Salva. So this is a tamarind. It's kind of a fruit. Chewing on the sour, juicy fruit made Salva feel a little better. When they reached the bushes, Uncle pointed out a clump of rocks up ahead and told Salva to walk as far as the rocks. After that, a lone acacia, another clump of rocks, a spot bare of everything except sand. Uncle continued in this way for the rest of the walk. Each time he spoke to Salva using his full name. Each time Salva would think of his family and his village, and he was somehow able to keep his wounded feet moving forward, one painful step at a time. So, Salva, without Uncle Juir's help, Salva probably would have separated from the group and died in the desert. This shows Uncle's love and feelings of responsibility for Salva. Salva is motivated to survive by thinking about his family and home. So, without Uncle, Salva probably would have died, but Uncle was there to help him. At last, the sun was reluctantly forced from the sky. A blessing of darkness fell across the desert, and it was time to rest. The next day was a precise copy of the one before. The sun and the heat, and, worst of all to Salva's mind, a landscape that was utterly unchanged. The same rocks, the same acacias, the same dust. There was not a thing to indicate that the group was making any progress at all across the desert. Salva felt as if he had walked for hours while staying in exactly the same place. The fierce heat sent up shimmering waves that made everything look wobbly. So this, a heat wave. Or was he the one who was wobbling? That large clump of rocks up ahead, it almost seemed to be moving. It was moving. It was not rocks at all. It was people. Salva's group drew nearer. They got closer. Salva counted 9 men. All of them collapsed on the sand. One made a small, desperate motion with his hand. Another tried to raise his head, but fell back again. None of them made a sound. As Salva watched, he realized that 5 of the men were completely motionless. What does it mean that 5 of the men are motionless? It means the men have died. So 9 of these men, 5 of them are dead. One of the women in Salva's group pushed forward and knelt down. This is kneeling, knelt down. She opened her container of water. "What are you doing?" a man called. "You cannot save them." The woman did not answer. When she looked up, Salva could see tears in her eyes. She shook her head, then poured a little water onto a cloth and began to wet the lips of one of the men on the sand. So a woman tries to help the living men. Salva looked at the hollow eyes and the cracked lips of the men lying on the hot sand, and his own mouth felt so dry that he nearly choked when he tried to swallow. "If you give them your water, you will not have enough for yourself," the same voice shouted. "It is useless. They will die, and you will die with them." So they find men suffering in the desert. Fi- Five have already died. But then a woman tries to help the man. But this makes another man angry. He says you can't save them, and it is useless. They will die, and you will die with them. So that's the end of chapter 9. Let's pretend you are walking in a desert with a small amount of water, like Salva's group. If you found people suffering, would you give them your water? Or would you keep the water to help you survive, knowing they will probably die? Hmm. This type of situation is called an ethical dilemma. Ethical dilemma. Ethics is the philosophy of right and wrong behavior, and a dilemma is a very difficult problem or situation. In the book, there are many ethical dilemmas, situations where it is difficult to decide what is good and bad. Is stealing always bad? For example, is helping others always good? Hmm. We'll talk more about ethics in the future. So now let's move on to the summary. Please write this summary in your notebook now. I'll read it a little quicker. Strangers visit Naya's village to talk about water. Salva's group is walking across the hot and dry Akobo Desert. Salva hurts his toe. He begins to cry and walks slower. Uncle Juir saves Salva by walking with him and motivating him. The next day, Salva's group finds 9 men lying in the desert. 5 are dead. A woman helps one man by giving him water. A man yells at her. He says she doesn't have enough water to share and survive. Please write this in your notebook. Now, let's look at the homework for the next class. It will be a video. Please write this in your notebook. Number 1, read chapter 10. Wow, we're on chapter 10. Number 2, write a 1-sentence summary about Naya, and of course, a 1-sentence summary about Salva. Write and answer the chapter 10 bell ringers. Number 1, the visitors in Naya's village say they will find water between what? A, two trees, B, two rocks, C, two houses. Number two, did Uncle Jarir want to stay in Ethiopia? A, yes, or B, no. Please write these in your notebook and answer these for your homework after midterms. We will begin chapter 10 after your exams. Okay, class, thank you again for doing the online class with me. Good work today. I miss you, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Goodbye.